Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, friends, so this is the third day of the meditation. How many are learning something about their mind? Want to learn a little more? You have enough to deal with already. So yesterday we were talking about the three levels of wisdom, being the intellectual wisdom of the Dhamma that you read about, and then you reflect on those teachings, readings, think about them, ponder them, observe them as they're happening in and around you, and so on. And then finally, the deepest level being that kind of meditative insights or openings of the mind that sort of convince you of the teaching. Because in the beginning there could be doubts. Yeah, that sounds cool. Karma, nibbana. Yeah, but it's like you really don't know. But once you get to deep insights, then it's like you're 100% convinced. And not even a Jehovah's Witness or somebody else would be able to, deconvince you. Excuse me. And one of the, as we were talking about, vipassana meditation, is comprised of the two aspects of passana, means to see, seeing. And vi is a prefix that means to divide up into the parts. So it means seeing the mental process divided up into its parts. Normally we just see and do things and we just think it's me that's doing it, and it's an automatic process, and we just think it's, we don't even know actually, but we just take it for granted. But vipassana means seeing the mental process in its multifaceted aspects and divided up into its parts, and also impermanence, seeing the impermanence of the mental process, and ultimately even the no-self nature of consciousness. So one of the very important teachings of the Buddha concerning the mind, our body and mind, are called the Panch Upadana Khandha, or the 5 aggregates. These are the 5 aspects of our body and mind. And it's actually the essence of dukkha. Because in the Buddha's definition of suffering, he says, birth, sickness, old age, disease, and death are suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Then he went on to say, not getting what you want is suffering, getting what you don't want is suffering. And then he said, in short, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. So you can see that those 5 aggregates are actually the very core of the Buddha's teaching about suffering. And because it's also what we are. There's nothing apart from that. And the mental process is comprised of these things. I know it sounds like a kind of an intellectual, again, but that's an intellectual teaching. But when you reflect on it, then you think about it. Okay, what is physical form? What is feeling? What is perception? What is volition? What is consciousness? And when you reflect on those, and when you observe them in meditation, then it starts to get more meaning. It's no longer just a pie in the sky, airy-fairy, kind of dogma or something that some people think it is. And then in the deepest levels of wisdom, in the realizations, then in fact it's the 5 aggregates of clinging, seeing their no-self nature, which is tantamount to entering the stream in the first stage of enlightenment. Seeing the no-self aspect of consciousness. So it's good to have an idea about it, and especially if you're practicing Vipassana meditation, because that's what actually Vipassana means, seeing the mental process divided up into form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, and how they're constantly changing, arising and vanishing. So bear with me a little bit. So material form, basically, it means any of the 5 physical sense objects, which are sounds that come through the ear, visible objects that strike the eye, odors that go through the nose, flavors on the tongue, and tactile, body sensations, either on the skin or coming from within the body, those kind of sensations. And so whenever, we're always getting impinged by those sensory stimulations. And that produces a feeling. Whenever the senses are contacted, it produces a feeling. Let's say you look in a mirror and you see yourself. And you may get a pleasant feeling or you may get an unpleasant feeling, depending on what you think of yourself. Right? So, but that's a mental reaction. It's the mind's interpretation of what this physical stimulus either produces a painful, pleasant, or neutral feeling. That's called Vedana. And it's the first aspect of our mental experience. That's the first aspect of the mind that comes into play, is Vedana, when something strikes the sense organs. That's the vibration of the web. When a sound vibration strikes the ear, that sets up a vibration in the nervous system that's relaying through the nervous system and then registers in the brain as perception, or registers as the feeling and perception. And so when it's coming through the nervous system, it's picked up as this is something painful, or this is something pleasant, or this is something neutral. But it's a conditioned thing. It's a conditioned response. The pleasant and painful and neutral are not absolute qualities that are given to certain objects. But everything we've ever experienced in our life, from the time you were a baby, or even coming from previous lives, the mind has categorized them as this is gives me a pleasant feeling, and this gives me a painful feeling, or a neutral feeling. Like the example of the baby I mentioned the other day, right? Grandmother gives the baby a sweet. And then, because of that sweet, it's a pleasurable feeling. And then it wants that again, and it identifies the face of the mother with this pleasurable feeling. So then the grandmother gives a pleasurable feeling because it's associating that with expecting it to get a sweet that's going to give it what it really wants is the pleasurable feeling on the tongue. So this is very important to understand because it's about conditioning and how we get trapped by craving, and desire and craving as well as aversion. And immediately upon the feeling arises the perception. And the perception is how the mind labels, identifies, or pictures that feeling, which is basically just a vibration, an invisible kind of vibration. Well, maybe coming through the eye, it's a visible vibration, but coming through the ear, you're not seeing it, or coming through the nose. So these are just what we call the vibrations. But then it pictures it, such as the sound, right? Sound vibration. How many people were sitting this morning meditating, and then when you heard sounds, what happened in the mind? Did you identify those sounds as those are birds are chirping, those are the teacher talking, those are the person next to me moving? Okay, those are perceptions. Those are how the mind creates and recreates a mental picture based on an empty kind of vibration, or just a vibration. And that's how we memorize it. And every object has its particular vibration. Every sound has its particular vibration. That's how you can sit with your eyes closed and you can hear many, many sounds going off, but all these perceptions are popping into your mind, right? Just like popcorn. Rain on the roof, birds chirping, people talking outside, car going down the road, plane going overhead. And the mind is just popping out all these perceptions. And then depending on your past experience with the object, then you will either, like that object or not like the object. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Sometimes some people say, well, does feeling come first and then perception? Does perception come first and then feeling? Well, according to the text, it says feeling comes first, but I don't think it matters that much because sometimes you can't really decipher that very easily. But sometimes the perception is more evident, and then the feeling arises, or the reaction. But anyway, don't make a big deal out of that. It's about trying to determine exactly which came first. The main thing is to understand the process involved. So the feeling is related to the object. And that's why we get attached to the objects again. Because in the object itself, it depends on your past experience with that. But those things can change. Feelings can change. What used to give you a painful feeling, later on in your life could give you a pleasant feeling. And what, when you were younger, gave you a pleasant feeling, later on could give you a painful feeling, because they're impermanent and they're subject to change. But we tend to cling on to the object and saying, that object has to have that meaning forever and ever and ever. But then when it changes, the example, typical example, and don't get offended if this pertains to you or something, okay? Because it's one of the most common examples. So, when you're young, you might have had a girlfriend or your boyfriend, you might have fallen in love or even got married. And so, in those first few weeks, months, or years, that other significant other gave you a pleasant feeling when you saw them, right? Maybe when you first saw them because of their look and all that, a pleasant feeling. If you like blondes and you saw a blonde, then a pleasant feeling would arrive. If you're from California or something. Or blue eyes, or whatever, all these different things, right? Straight hair, curly hair. All these are kind of things that people get attached to and people get attracted to. But, so after some years, if that friend, starts having eyes for somebody else, then you can feel this, this dart of pain in your heart. And then if that persists, and this person or whatever, the breakup occurs, and so on, then your feeling toward that person may change. It's the same person in look, right? So that's what I'm saying. These feelings are subject to change and they're impermanent. But we get attached to the object thinking it shouldn't change. And that's what means clinging, taking things to be permanent, which are impermanent. That everything is subject to change. And we can't control others. So people have gone through 3 or 4 or 5 or even more relationships, haven't they? You read it in the news and all that. In the same way with, and no two people will have the same experience with a particular object. Let's say you're in a museum looking at a Van Gogh painting. There's 2 or 3 people looking at a Van Gogh painting. One person says, "Wow, Van Gogh is a masterpiece. Look at that perfect color." And another person goes, doesn't like it at all. The other person maybe have a neutral feeling. And then they start getting in an argument. "What? You don't like Van Gogh? What are you, crazy?" And maybe even come to fisticuffs. It's happened, hasn't it? Maybe not over a Van Gogh painting, but certainly a lot of other things, right? Music, for example, clinging to music. Turn off that dirty country music, or whatever. And people kill over this attachment to their ideas of what is good or bad, beautiful or ugly. And that's the problem, basically. And it's the clinging, thinking these things have absolute value and clinging to them. And then wanting to fight and defend your opinion because you're clinging even to your opinion. And that can be applied to regular sensory objects, religion, politics. Every war in the world has been created over some types of clinging to ideology, religion, or whatever. When none of those have any real absolute value because it's been created in the mind. So feeling and perception are those, the second and the third of the 5 aggregates. So there's the form, which is the material stimulus, and that's needed to trigger off the mind. And then the feeling and the perception arises. That means you have identified the object, and you identified it as something you want or you want to get away from. And what's the next step? You have to decide what to do about it. You've got to, and volition is the larger of those aggregates. where perception happens only in a nanosecond. But the volition means you get time to think. Do I want to push this away, or do I want to go and hold that? Do I want to react? Do I want to shout back at somebody because he called me an idiot? Or whatever. So it's the decision that you are going to make based upon this feeling and perception. But sometimes there's no time limit. Like you get an itch and immediately you go like that. So you didn't have time to think really. Or maybe just a brief nanosecond, which you know, just impulsively you reach up to scratch something. Or you hear a loud sound. So some of those reactions are instantaneously, and some of them are kind of little delayed reactions where you have time to think and you come to a decision. Maybe you were thinking, should I tell that lie or not? Well, you weigh it, and then you think, oh, okay, I'm going to do it anyway, depending on what kind of result you want, and what kind of gain you want to get. So all of our moral actions basically also take place within that sankhara. That means the volition. But it also means the thinking. It's not only volition, but it means the thoughts about it. You're thinking, analyzing, debating, scheming, planning, and then you take action. And once you've taken the action, you can't take it back. The action is the karma. So this is where karma is created. It's created in the sankhara. But it's based on the feeling and the perception. So if your perceptions and feelings are faulty, then your sankharas and actions are going to be faulty. That means you're going to lead to some unpleasant consequences. And people, jump to conclusions and so on about things, and then wind up regretting, what the things that they did. So that's why in Vipassana meditation is actually training to observe feeling, perception, and then the sankhara, the urges, and that desire that, should I reach up and scratch that itch or not? Or so on. Should I move that leg because of the pain or not? So you have time to contemplate it. But then once you've actually done it, you can't take it back. That action is done, and you will get some kind of effect from that. Maybe not immediately, or in the future. But it's in that little space of time after the perception and before the mind is reactive, or to delay the reaction, where you have time to bring in the Dhamma and contemplate. Is this action I'm about to do going to bring me pain in the future, or in the present and the future for myself and others? And if you see it is, then you make the effort not to do it. But if you contemplate it and you say this action or speech or even thought is not going to bring me pain in the future, it's blameless, then you have the ability to decide whether you're going to do it or not. So most people don't have that time. They don't have that luxury, right? Because they're operating out of their hardwired nervous system. They don't have that buffer zone. That's the buffer zone. The buffer zone is that ability to just observe and not react yet, and then consider. Do I really need to change my posture right now? Let me endure it for 5 more minutes. And then you'll be happy that you did. So anyway, that's where the practice of Dhamma comes, about purifying our actions of body, speech, and mind, is creating that buffer zone and that delayed reaction before the sankhara, after the perception and before the sankhara takes place. That's sort of do or die, you could say, in terms of in Dhamma language, in terms of the karma. And every time you do the sankhara, it strengthens it. Because again, there's just neurons in the brain and neural pathways that we've been creating. And every time you repeat it, it puts another little groove, like water running down a ditch, making it deeper and deeper, each time. So the same way with our habits. And that's why they're so hard for people to change, because a lot of people have been repeating those habits since they were a child. And addictions and all these kind of things. And really, the meditation is really the only method, or maybe I shouldn't say only, but it's probably, that allows you to actually get at your mind. Systematically training the mind to be able to create that buffer zone, and also the wisdom that goes with it. Because you could create a buffer zone and decide to go ahead and tell that lie, or steal that thing, or go sleep with somebody else's husband or wife or whatever. But it's the wisdom that, the wisdom of knowing what is skillful and what is not skillful, what's going to bring suffering and what is going to bring not suffering. And not just for immediate gratification. Most people live their life for immediate gratification. They don't think about the consequences. And then they suffer later down the road. So in the practice of Dhamma, we're interested in a long-term gratification. That means the peacefulness of our mind, the happiness of our mind, the mind free from guilt, worry, remorse, and fear. Not just immediate sensual gratification. Okay, so we've talked about 4 of the aggregates, right? Form, feeling, perception, volition, and then the last one is consciousness. And that's the hardest one to kind of directly observe and understand. But basically it's that sense of I am the one that's feeling, perceiving, thinking, deciding. That sense of I that's there behind in the consciousness. And everything we do is for that I. And basically it means the ego. The trinity of the ego is I, me, right. I, me, mine. That's the trinity of the ego. And every single action that we take revolves around one of those 3. I might have already mentioned that even already. But anyway, that's that, so the consciousness that we take for self. We take it to be, this is me, myself, and mine. Because it thinks it's the one that's deciding to do things, but actually the decisions come from habits, not from you. And the decisions come from the wisdom that you've cultivated also. Like before you studied the Dhamma, you might have, easily broken precepts without worrying about it too much, killed cockroaches and insects and told lies and maybe, did some stuff, right? I talk from my own experience. But then, thinking everyone else does it, okay, it's okay, right? Locker room talk, right? But then once you, study the Dhamma, and you realize, oh, these things are unskillful. Now, when you have the urge to do those things, now you will reflect on that and hopefully then use that wisdom and understanding to make the right decision, to abandon the unskillful thought, speech, and actions. So anyway, all of those 5 aggregates, they occur every moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking. He said those aggregates come together in a kind of a split moment and also vanish. But they arise again and vanish at a supersonic speed. And he said the mind processes information. That 5 aggregate process occurs 10 to the 24th power in a finger snap or the blink of an eye. 10 to 24, crunch some numbers. Come on, you mathematicians. How many is that? I think it's a lot, right? Faster than a Cray 3rd generation supercomputer is processing information. The mind is faster. And so that's why it's very difficult for us to see the mental process and see the illusions that are created and the traps that the mind has created for us. But vipassana meditation is the Buddha's high technology. So a supercomputer is high technology, right? The mind is higher tech than that. Because this mind, not mine, but Stephen Jobs or whatever, they created computers. This mind has created computers and everything else in the world. So I'm just explaining that to try to give a kind of a larger picture of what is going on in the mind. But anyway, so that process is happening every moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking. And the 5 aggregates and the 6 senses are the 2 main subjects of Vipassana meditation. And in another very sutta that the Buddha gave, the Buddha was out, had a group of monks and he was talking with them, one day giving a lecture. And he says, monks, I'll teach you the all. And you go, oh, really? Okay, we're listening. He says, what is the all? It's the eye, visible objects, and seeing. It's the ear, sounds, and hearing. It's the nose, odors, and smelling. It's the tongue, flavors, and tasting. It's the skin, tangible objects, and feeling. And it's the mind objects, and knowing. And he said, and that's all. Meaning, that's all what the mind is. It's just moments of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking that are arising and passing away in that speed that I mentioned. Or at least, a high speed. And he said, he asked him, can you find me anything else except this all? No. He said, that's right, because there isn't. And the meaning of that means there's no self or I that's in there as the owner or controller. It's just these moments of sensory impingement, or what are called mind moments. So each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking is called a mind moment in Buddhist psychology. And again, that process is happening at, again, faster than a supercomputer. And what our brain filters out is probably 0.0001 of the information that's surrounding us in the world, the vibrations. Because even scientists will tell you our eye only picks up certain colors of the spectrum. The sound only hears certain wavelengths. And there's many others out there in the universe. Animals have different senses. They pick up different kind of sound and so on. So our brain is limited. And therefore our experience of the world is also limited in that sense. But of course, we as human beings, thinking we're at the top of everything, that's why we don't believe anything else exists. But anyway, so the tuning into that process of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, that's what I was, suggesting this morning, to gradually open up to that process. Because when you train the mind to speed up the rate of perception, so that's speeding up the rate of perception so you can keep up with the flow of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking as it's coming through, which is possible, very possible. It's only our clinging and grasping that slows the mind down and not being able to notice many things. Again, it's because our mind sticks like glue, like flypaper to objects, and then everything else just goes unknown by. And so therefore we think these few things that we experience is the real. And it's very interesting, the mind, consciousness is also arising and vanishing. Each of those moments of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking, consciousness arises and ceases. But it arises again and ceases so fast that we don't see the impermanence. We don't see the spaces between the consciousness. And it's run together like the old-fashioned reels of film. The motion picture reels of film, right? Individual frames with a space in the middle. And then they run a long reel through the projector, and people sitting in the theater get all hot and bothered, they're thinking it's real. But when the projector jams and the thing stops, and people go, what? They lose their interest. And one of those frames doesn't mean much. It's only when many are run together that it gives the mind time to then recall the perception and the feeling and the memory, and then react. And so, like even with birds chirping, that's actually a good meditation. Sounds are very good for observing this process. Like you're sitting and meditating and you hear and the mind is trying to think, is that a robin redbreast, or is that if you're a birder or something, right? You're trying to think, identify what kind of bird. But if you only hear one, well, it's not an owl. but you may not. There's not enough time to think about it, right? Or even if you just turn your head real fast, even try it right now. Start in one corner of the room and just close your eyes and open your eyes and kind of go like that. You wouldn't have had time to really pick out and recognize too many things, right? But if you're moving slowly, and that process is happening many times, you realize, okay, that's the wood, that's the water tube, that's this, and that's that person, this person, that person. Because the many arising and vanishing, like, is creating the movie of this object. And so it gives the illusion of, a concrete object. Now, the object may be there, but again, we're trying to understand the mind and how the mind is creating it. Because the material world is how our mind interprets the material world. That's where our life is revolving around. So, this is the trick. The trick of vipassana is you speed up the rate of perception so that, without clinging to any particular one. You just note and release, note and release, note and release. And that's why the more things you can notice, it's easy to not get stuck because there's something else you can notice. But if your mind isn't clear, then you get stuck on that pain and there's nothing else to really feel, so the mind gets glued to that. Or gets glued to some sound that's happening. But you got to give the mind more options, right? And so after developing the centeredness and the concentration and the training, like going through the body, then you start doing yoga, you increase the life force, and so when you sit down, you can feel lots of things. And then with the breathing, so the in-breath comes and goes, the out-breath comes and goes, and you train yourself on arising and vanishing. The sensations of the in-breath arise and vanish. Sensations of the out-breath arise and vanish. And even while that in-breath is expanding, you might hear 4 or 5 different sounds of a bird on this side, a different kind of bird on that side, noise from over there that just arise and vanish. And see, normally when you meditate, you think, oh, that's a distraction, right? Especially people practicing samatha, thinking all these noises and all these things are distractions. So it's an enemy for them. And they get angry when the noises are going on, because they're trying to block it out in order to fix their mind on a particular point. But in vipassana, it's the opposite. We invite it in. Come on. I dare you. Come on. The more the merrier. And so, because that gives you more things to observe. But you hear one sound, but instead of clinging to it, there's always something else you can hear. You hear one sound here, you hear a sound on the other side. You hear a sound there, hear a sound on the other side. Or in front, or behind. If you feel something on your foot, feel something on your head, or your right arm, or your left arm. There's always something. It's not that you're actually looking, but the mind is awake, and they appear. And so the more you can note, the mind doesn't have enough time to cling on and bring in the memory about the object. And therefore the liking or disliking, the greed or the hatred also doesn't come out. And that doesn't divert your attention. And also the sense of ego is in directly proportion to the amount of identification or attachment to the objects. Our whole life around that. Our whole life is based on that. I'm a surfer, I like waves, I'm this and that. The whole life is built up around our immediate little world. So it's difficult to kind of let that go, but the more things you can... so the sense of I is based on the amount of attention you're giving to the object. Now, if you're not giving attention to the object, and the objects are no longer the past and future related to the various stimulations are no longer come into play, the ego doesn't have any ground to stand on, because its whole existence is in relationship to the objects that it's attached to or doesn't like. So when that process stops in the mind, the sense of the I starts dissolving, because it was never anything concrete. It was only a shadow in the mind. It was only a bubble. As I mentioned, the baby's not born with a sense of I. We've created it. It's become Frankenstein's monster for some people. It torments them. So that's why I call this the trick of Vipassana, is you speed up the rate of perception. Again, like the train going out of the station. And it builds up speed, depending on the strength of your concentration. Builds up speed. And it's similar to a child's coloring book. This is a very good analogy. A child's coloring book. You know, the child's coloring book, at least some of them, you know, the kind that they have many dots on a page, right? There's many dots on a page. And looking at the dots, it doesn't really mean much. But you give the child a colored pencils, and they connect these dots with the red line, and they connect the other dots with the green line, and some other dots with a blue line. And then Minnie Mouse or Donald Duck pops up. And then they see it, because they've connected the dots, right? But that's what our mind is doing. It's connecting the dots. Because of attachment, it's connecting the dots of feeling, hearing, seeing, or many dots of feeling, and it comes up, oh, that's my knee, or that's my body. Or you're listening to sounds, and you know, it's connecting all those dots. And then getting angry or liking them or whatever, because it brings in the memory. So, again, this is the high technology. The Buddha's high tech, Vipassana mental technology is speeding up the rate of perception to trick the mind out of itself. Because you're not giving it time to drag in the past or future. And in the same way, because the ego exists for the past and future, it starts dissolving. And you can directly experience that in meditation when you've developed this kind of awareness to a high degree. You can experience that. And that is this, you know, the kind of insights, you know, the deeper meditative kind of insights. So in Vipassana meditation, we're trying to disconnect the dots. And don't give the mind time to cling on to any particular thing. There's always something else. There's always, you know, again, so many, thousands of things available if you're awake. The problem is, if you're half asleep, then you're not going to feel anything. Or if you're lost in your thoughts. That's why those drowsiness and being lost in a thought are the two biggest hindrances, because it virtually blots out any possibility for any type of development. So so when you're doing, also when you're tuning in to that flow of impermanence, you can see how easily the mind starts to grab at something. Actually, you want to hear the evolution of suffering? Okay, according to the mental process, okay? Okay, if you're meditating, let's say you feel a sensation. The first thing that arises, maybe there's a unpleasant sensation arising somewhere. And then the mind identifies that feeling and says, that is a pain in a knee. And then it says, that knee is in this larger body. And this larger body belongs to me. And I don't like it. And they're struggling. That's the evolution of suffering. Check it out next time. It starts with an empty vibration floating around in space, but yet the mind grabs it, locates it somewhere, identifies it, places it, and then grabs it as mine. And that's exactly, that's the core arising of suffering. And that's why the Buddha talked about these 5 aggregates of clinging, because people don't understand them. Why don't they teach that in school? Don't you think it would be worthwhile? Why don't they teach mindfulness in school? Some places now are starting it. This is critical. This is the mind. This is the world-creating process. Yet no one cares. I wouldn't say no one, but I mean, society in general, they don't care. Because they're stymied by whatever different beliefs they have that don't allow them to, open up to new things. So, again, I'm mentioning this because this is the next. This is the next. You're sitting and meditating, what should I do now? You have to keep refocusing the attention, coming back, re-grounding. Trying to get that initial type of some initial kind of concentration. And you'll know when it happens, because when you feel that kind of relaxation and you're able to, kind of just feel even intermittently the sitting and breathing, there's some kind of relaxed thing, and training yourself just to, hearing, feeling, and stay alert. That's the main thing, is the alertness. And then the in and out breathing is always there to come back to, but around it, through it, are other things that are, you gradually tune into that. And when the mind starts to cling to something, you have to apply your wisdom. Like, if it's starting to react to an itch, just say, unpleasant feeling. Just, molecules and atoms just vibrating. Don't say that's an itch on my face. That's when you suffer. Because then you don't like it. You're identifying that itch as being on your head belonging to this body belonging to you. And you don't like it. And every other type of scenario is the same. It all comes back to that same process. So this is investigation. In your next meditation, this is, if you want to practice vipassana, this is the vipassana method. And it's the Buddha's method. You can read it in all the texts. So anyway, that's why investigation of Dhamma is a very, it's a second factor of enlightenment. And when you actually start to observe and see how quickly the mind, you get a lot of energy, because it's almost like exciting. But again, it's the hindrances that are the biggest problem, because they're blocking our ability to go into that deeper level. So, I think maybe that may be enough for this Dhamma talk. Give you a few more things to maybe consider. So, see, the more understanding you have, then when you're meditating, you don't have to go, what did the Buddha say? Oh, let me get my rule book. Let me get my sutta. No. When you have this intellectual knowledge, when you have it at your beck and call, like right, there, having memorized these things, having read it over and over, and then also just even in your meditation, even if you just do an intellectual meditation, that will be to your benefit. In your next meditation, just go over these 5 aggregates. Just tell yourself, what is the form aggregate? It's this body made up of atoms and cells. What is feeling? The impingements coming through and the painful and pleasant reactions. And see the mental labels and pictures that are popping out, perception. And see how you get attached to it. That's investigation. And it's very, very interesting. But you have to know how to do it. It takes practice because our mind gets so easily stuck in its old habits. No, I want to go back and just focus on the breathing or whatever. Or, that's too much, it's too crazy for me. But, that's what I, highly suggest and even sort of challenge you to work on in these next few days. Because, you may not know the benefit right now, but once you get some insights, you'll be a believer. But that's the difference between just the intellectual understanding and the meditative wisdom. And I know in a retreat like this, it's really not enough time for most people to develop that to a deep level. But at least if you know about it, then a lot of people don't even know this kind of thing is there. But okay, so where there's questions from last time? There's still questions, right? No. Yeah, don't write too many more questions. I won't be able to get through it. But if you have a couple about that topic, maybe.
Question there.
Okay.
Once we get a sense of that Vipassana process in the meditative experience, and I think I've had this experience, that's kind of what I'm asking. Then when we're in a supermarket or something's going on in our life and those things are starting to cycle, and we use this focus to see it. I seem to have the situation once with the suffering that was being created. I started looking at the Four Noble Truths. Because this has been going on too long, right? So I went through it, and it's suffering, right? And the cause of suffering, and it's myself. And when I saw that, it's like it evaporated.
Yes.
The whole cycle stopped.
That's the function of wisdom. There's a saying, wisdom will set you free. How many have heard that saying? I don't know who said it, but it's a very old saying, wisdom will set you free. And it's absolutely true. And that's why the Buddha's teaching is mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, or morality, concentration, and wisdom. Wisdom is always there at the end as the goal. And that's why the saying that there's no meditation without wisdom, and no wisdom without meditation. Or as Bhante Ji says, no concentration without wisdom, and no wisdom without concentration. Because it's the wisdom. It's like, look, you might have smoked cigarettes back in the day when the cigarettes were not talked about as being bad, back in the 40s and 50s, much. So people, smoke. But then once all this information came out, and also about polluted foods and all these contaminated foods and pesticides, and now people are stopping to eat those things. It's because of the wisdom that they got, knowing that that's going to cause you suffering or premature death. So it's the same with the Dhamma. We're killing ourselves by drowning in our own sorrows and addicted to our unwholesome habits that keep bringing us pain on different fronts. And eventually you kill people. So the Dhamma is that medicine. Okay, so I think that's So we can just take a deep, slow breath just for 15 seconds. Just touch base with your buttocks, your feet, pressing the floor, ground zero. Hold the breath in a few seconds. Feel the relaxing out breath. Okay, now mindfully stand up and do some standing awareness for a while. Three-part breathing for a while. Do 9 or 10 more rounds. Nice rhythmic three-part breathing. Take at least 3 or 4 or 5 more seconds to breathe in, holding the air in the lungs. 3 or 4 seconds. Breathing out. Just follow the contracting out breath down to the in. Feel that last bit of air going out. Feeling the next in breath. When you hold the air in the lungs. continuing that deep, slow breathing longer. Notice other things arising and vanishing around. Body sensation. Sounds arising and vanishing in the background. Feeling the touch of the clothing against the skin. Removing the dust from the mirror. You feel pulse of blood. Doesn't need to interrupt the breathing. There's different dots arising, vanishing. Dots of the expanding in-breath. Dots of sound, dots of contracting out-breath. Dots of perception. Thought. sitting again, like a couple of sketches, more sensations, more. And the in-breath arms over the head, we can lock the fingers. Sweet up. Out breath, that's good. 3 times. Release the fingers. On the toes, arms over the head. Good.